Hi, so I wanted to make a video about technology and mankind and where we're headed and the sort of ethical and spiritual implications of it, and talk a little bit about quantum computing while I'm there. But mostly this is going to be on advancements of technology in terms of how invasive it might be for us, in terms of what this means for like ethical and moral considerations, and what this means for spiritual considerations as well. So if that sounds like your thing, that's amazing. Grab a coffee, pull up a chair, and we will see how this goes. So I wanted to make a video for a little while now because in 2023, the World Economic Forum had a meeting at Davos, as it does, where all the rich folk jet off and hold their meetings on the direction the world might be going in. And you can find this particular one on their website as well. So this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is actually on the World Economic Forum website. It's probably on Google, and there's probably snippets of it on TikTok and various other social media as well, no doubt. And this meeting was particularly horrifying to me from a sort of, just from a human perspective, because in this meeting, they talked about how new breakthroughs in technology could now mean that your brain is actually accessible. Your brainwaves can be read. And they theorised a scenario, a future scenario, whereby you are sitting in your office and you're getting into a flow state because you're doing a task that you quite enjoy doing. And so maybe they pump you full of more serotonin in order that you continue this flow state. And the computer selects your favourite music as well, which again helps enhance this particular state of mind. That alone is disturbing, but it gets worse. So basically then, in this scenario, your brainwaves, the sort of readout of what's going on in your head, is also being monitored by your boss sitting in another room, who's scanning the brainwaves of all the employees in that particular office. Now, today is an important day for this brainwave scanning because someone in your office has committed a crime and they don't know who. So they are checking brainwaves to see if they can find anything anomalous which might scan, which might correlate to this particular crime. The usual things still happen. That is to say that you're still going to get told off if you veer off tasks and your mind wanders to other avenues. Your boss can read this and will tell you off accordingly. Meanwhile, they're still hunting for this particular person. You're getting a bit worried because you had associations with someone who you feel might have done something a bit dodgy. So your own brainwaves are now getting a bit agitated anyway. And then people get interviewed in real life and they discover the culprit. There is just so many horrifying implications of that scenario. The first horror, perhaps, is that the folk from the World Economic Forum presenting this were trying to sell it to the audience as a wonderful thing. Wouldn't it be amazing, they were saying, if this could be the future? Wouldn't this be a really desirable future, you know? No, not to me. That's a horror show. You know, I've long thought that with greater technology will come a greater desire to control the populace. We could see that in COVID. You know, during COVID and the lockdowns and all the rest of it, everyone was working from home and some companies chose to spy, allegedly, illegally, upon their employees, using their cameras without their employees' knowledge to check on what they were doing. That's a horrific breach of privacy. But companies too now so many things are automated, so many tasks, so that they can check what you're doing. They can absolutely see in real time exactly how long you're taking on a particular task, etc. Or maybe not in real time, but there are still various monitoring tools at hand, which mean your privacy is in question, you know? Now, if they get to a point where brainwaves, and they allegedly have this tech already, if they get to a point where they roll out technology where your brainwaves are read and then used by your bosses, either to augment a flow state or God knows what else, or read what you're thinking and then try and coerce you to get back on track, so you can't even have a moment's peace inside your own mind, potentially. There are so many horrifying thoughts that go along with that. It's a horrifying scenario. It isn't just a breach of privacy. To me, it's like a breach of protocol, of breaking the human condition completely. You know, we're human, we're not robots. We are complex animals. We have all sorts of emotions and desires and creative impulses and this spiritual drive as well within us, and an ability to reach God. You know, we are not just reducible to mere machine. And yet society, ever since the dawn of the industrial era, has been trying to turn us into nothing more than robots. Our school systems teach us to learn without thinking. We don't question at school. We learn to question if we go to university in some instances, but not all. So many people now that are out in the world think critical thinking just means hitting up Google, and if a fact-checking organisation says, yes, this is true, they obediently believe that without further question. It may be true, it may not be true. But the point is, we should be able to think for ourselves and examine the criteria ourselves and make a determination by ourselves. And so that to me really worried me, because I thought, well, I can really see a future where that sort of thing is rolled out. And it needs people to push back. It needs people to push back against it. And many people probably won't. You know? Part of the problem is that all sorts of organisations have many tiny, horrible little rules and regulations that dehumanise people already. And many people just don't speak out about them. And they tend to take it as the norm. And again, because of that lack of critical thinking. But it isn't even just about a lack of critical thinking. There's a desire for herd mentality. There's a conflict of interest if your salary rests upon you turning up to this job. There's all sorts of ways in which degrading or dehumanising conditions or objectives can be sort of woven into our society and then made normal. So that to me it's a horrifying scenario, you know? I feel a bit like many romantic poets must have felt at the dawn of the industrial age, when they could see very well what was happening, you know, with mass production and giant factories and just the horror of it all, and people forced to work in really inhumane conditions. And there were people who could see that this was not good. This was not anything to strive for. This wasn't progress, not really. It wasn't progress of the human spirit. It wasn't progress for us to become a fully realised human. You know, it's degrading and horrible. And we still see that now, of course. Nothing has changed, not really. People are still enslaved in their jobs in giant factories all over the world. People are still enslaved in all sorts of conditions in their jobs all over the world. You know, we've just disguised it and made it sound like a system, capitalism, in which anyone can be free and anyone can make their way up the ladder of success. When in reality, there isn't room. The system works as a pyramid scheme. It relies upon the impoverished masses struggling at the bottom of the ladder, at the bottom of this pyramid. And here we are, we're at the threshold of another brave new world, but this is getting really serious now, because this is a world where brainwaves can be read, and it's entirely probable that we will be microchipped in some way over the next few years. And it will be entirely probable that the push for transhumanism becomes ever greater. The wish for us to turn into machine, or at least become fused to machine, so that we too could become gods. Except, what sort of gods would we be? Because these machines do not have feelings and they're not connected spiritually. And so we would be impoverished again spiritually, further away from our spiritual roots, possibly not able to connect. Maybe we'd be hooked up to the internet, trying to disseminate information, great swathes of information, being accessible to our brains rather than having to be mediated by a small tablet or a phone or anything like that at all. Is that desirable, really, for us? Well, it might be desirable if you think that this universe is just this mechanistic thing, if you think it's just this bunch of happy little accidents that made humans, that somehow we evolved, and life on Earth, however completely improbable it was, again, just happened organically and naturally. And I'm not saying that God created us, because I don't know what might have created or tweaked us. I feel it's entirely possible that Earth is like a giant petri dish of all different life forms, and that we are studied extensively by beings from other planets, and that humans might have been tweaked by beings from other planets or from other dimensions. Who knows? I genuinely don't know. But I'm open to the thought that that could be true. But we have something unique, or something rather wonderful, and that is the ability to connect spiritually. That isn't just something that only happens to a few people, It's just some people are more connected than others. It's something we're all supposed to discover, because that's how our freedom begins. We become free when we discover that we're eternal beings, that the universe isn't this cold, dead place, that it's actually teeming with life, that everything is alive, all matter has life within it. Consciousness is not just in your body. Consciousness exists both outside and within. And when you start to discover this, truly discover this, that's when magic can happen. And I guess that's where quantum computing comes in, because quantum computing has links with spiritual philosophy, Eastern spiritual philosophy. As when it first got a bit trendy, there were books like The Dancing Wulin Masters and The Tao of Physics and things like this. Because, again, it was recognised that all matter is interconnected. The whole spooky action at a distance type of thing. The idea that you could separate tiny baby particles, but they could still operate as though they were together, they were linked. You couldn't break that link. And quantum computing now seems to be the way forward as well. although perhaps still quite unstable and, But in December, Google came up with a quantum chip called Willow. And quantum computing works in entirely different ways to conventional computers. It's such a vast leap in technology that it leaves the past behind. It's extraordinary, because it utilizes technology that's so alien to us, truly. And so, to give an example of what that could look like in real terms, Willow solved this problem that it managed to do in under 5 minutes. And it would have taken a conventional computer, a normal, fast, conventional computer, 10 septillion years. That's 10 with 24 zeros, apparently. I'm no mathematician. That's extraordinary. That's absolutely mind-blowing. It would be 10 septillion, I can't even say it, 10 septillion years is older than our planet. Okay, just to put this in some kind of context, it's insane. Under 5 minutes. What that's going to mean, who knows? And there is an argument to say, there's a theory to say that it can do this because it reaches into parallel dimensions to procure the answers it needs. It isn't just working in this dimension, which is extraordinary and exciting if true, and potentially has some consequences as well that might not be quite so beautiful in some instances. Who knows? But we are at a threshold now. We're at a threshold of something, and we can all sense it. We all know it. With AI alone, AI is now able to mimic what we can do so very well that many people don't spot the difference with AI pictures, for example. Writing, possibly you can tell the difference for the most part, but for now, bearing in mind it's evolving. So at the moment, I read somewhere last year that at the moment, the sort of age of AI, if you put it into human terms, it would be like, or the IQ of an AI would be like something like a 17-year-old student, an A-level student. And so maybe in a couple of years' time, it's going to be even better. And in another 10 years, who knows? What we are facing now is truly unprecedented. It's truly off the charts. We don't know where this goes, but I feel like we're at the threshold of something huge. And many, many people are probably going to just go along with the status quo again. Transhumanism, greater use of AI, which is going to see more and more humans redundant and wondering how we make ourselves relevant in our own lives, in our own societies. Because if we have a system of capitalism which seeks profit above the good of people and the good of animals and the good of the planet, as it does, do you think capitalism is going to give one tiny toss about your job if it can replace you with a computer? Computer will not get sick. Computer will not need payment, There is no variation in the behaviour of a computer. And Elon Musk's response to this is to say, well, hey, let's rush towards transhumanism because then we become relevant in our own story. Then machines will need us. Then we will have to be kept alive, It's insane that that's our best option, that technology is now escaping the original sort of design of it. It's becoming more intelligent. It will very soon outsmart the most smartest people on the planet. It's going to get to a point where people stop being able to understand how it's functioning, let alone how to stop it. You know, the genie is out the bottle, Pandora's box is open. And so we've got to look at the best case scenario of how we manage this. Well, it's going to manage us at some point. There's going to be a point where technology looks at us and thinks, well, humans are a liability on this planet. We set off bombs, we go to war. We're a horror show as a species goes. Bill Hicks used to call us a virus with shoes, you know? We're irrational. We're not nearly as logical or rational as we'd like to believe. We perpetuate the same problems of war again and again and again. We're destructive. We're destructive with the very environment that we need in order to live. We cause chaos. So many thousands and thousands of humans are impoverished at the bottom of this pyramid, not fulfilling their potential. You know, they're not even concerned with trying to fulfill their potential. They're just trying to live. They're just trying to survive against all the odds, which are heavily against them in some instances, in some parts of the world. And still, we're still perpetuating a form of capitalism which seeks to put profit above its own survival on this planet. Because there's going to come a point where we wreck our environment and it's irreversible. And many people think with climate change that we're kind of already at that tipping point. We've already passed it. And now it's just a case of damage limitation. And so we've got concepts like net zero, but net zero itself it's become a meaningless soundbite to just enable rich people to carry on getting rich and to carry on exploiting the poor, because all the poor people out there, the masses, they want to help. They want to help with the environmental concerns. They're going to be paying for it. You know, there's going to be a point where many people can't afford their homes anymore because they are enforced by governments to make changes to their homes, so-called eco changes or what have you, that they can't possibly afford. So they have to sell their homes potentially. And then, of course, there's a move to green cars. Well, these cars are not green. Electric cars aren't green. The lithium mining alone is horrific. They've got no resale value on a second-hand level because the batteries cost so very much that they're pointless and worthless. They're just another gimmick. And we're moving towards this time where capitalism, which long has not served the masses, is now going to work against us even more and be used against people even more. And of course, if you start talking about capitalism or other systems, everyone automatically says, oh, well, socialism doesn't work, therefore capitalism. It doesn't have to be this binary thing. It doesn't have to be this either-or scenario. It doesn't have to be, you know, it could be that we tweak capitalism to ensure that welfare comes first, that the welfare of people, the welfare of the planet, the welfare of animals is important and far more important than profit. So people, yes, still make a modest profit, but a really modest one, that there are stringent controls upon it globally. So you can't just sod off to another country and make your millions there, for example. But that might require a real sea change in the populace as a whole, because people still desire to make money for themselves and still support it in some instances, in others, even at the expense of the people, the planet, and animals. So short-sighted is our thinking. So we really, really need a sea change in order to move forward. And that's where spirituality comes in. Because when we learn we're eternal beings, that when we die to this particular body that we're in, we just go spend a time in another dimension. We have a life review. And then we come back and we do it all over again. And when you think about it in those terms, you realise that anything that we do now against the planet, we're going to have to pick up the pieces of in another life, in another form. There's going to be another us having to deal with this all over again. And when you consider also that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively, this sea of consciousness we live in, base reality is perhaps just love, you know? That was my experience on a plant medicine retreat many, many years ago. That at the heart of all of this, at the heart of our universe, is just love, a loving intelligence that knows exactly who you are, that knows exactly what you're doing, that knows all the micro minutiae of your life, of everyone's lives, of every tiny thing that happens on this planet. And that you're part of that, and it's within you, and you can go within and find that. It's extraordinary. And when you start to discover that, that should surely be where our world leaders are looking to develop, and looking to develop a populace that knows this, right? If they truly gave a shit about you, if they truly cared about the world, wouldn't they want to usher in this loving consciousness globally across the planet? Because imagine the changes that we could make if we made changes to this planet born from love and not fear. Fear is awful. Fear makes you shrink away from the world. Fear makes you hide. Fear is distortive. People can create horrific conditions for other humans or animals out of fear. Fear isn't real, but love is real. And love is expansive and joyful and open and caring and empathetic. Love is key. Every decision we make should be born from love. And yet the fear of our own death, the fear of our own demise is very, very real. And so people fall into this place of fear. But it's illusory, because this world is in part illusory. The base reality is that loving consciousness that underpins everything. And yet, we're about to take a turn on this planet, aren't we? That is going to lead us even further from that. If we become fused to machine, are we still going to be able to access that? You can access it right now. I think it's the greatest rebellious act that any human has got at this juncture. I really do. I wouldn't advocate looking within or meditating out as an act of wild rebellion alone. But it sure as hell is going to become one as we get further enslaved into various systems, you know, as we get suckered into this brave new world of greater technology, greater razzle-dazzle of AI and quantum computing and God knows what. But all of that will have greater control over your life. Of course it will, you know. I envisage a world where we do have smart homes, where everything is on an app, and that your apps can then be controlled by governments or God knows what else. In a worst case scenario, you could be forced to stay in your own home in a lockdown way because someone else could hack your doors and keep you there, you know? I mean, that's a horrific concept, and let's hope it never comes to that, but there could be variations on that theme. All sorts of variations on that theme. At the very least, if we have driverless cars, the idea that perhaps to try to keep emissions down, or God knows what else, for whatever other reason, that you might only be allocated a certain amount of miles every month, say, that you can travel, or you might only be allowed to travel within a certain radius of your home. And again, all of that could be tied up with climate change and God knows what. But ultimately, it will be because the people at the very top like power and they like control. And that figures, right? We know that there are loads of dark personality types on this planet, thousands of people, probably millions, that psychopathy or sociopaths or narcissism, it's rife within our society. And those people, they enjoy power and they enjoy control, high levels of coercion, manipulation, really dark schemes. And so they're drawn to positions of power all over the place. And giant corporations tend to act in psychopathic ways in some instances, where they seek to protect their organisation, almost like a cancer, over and above the good of the people, the environment, animals, etc. You could see that in the film Dark Waters, which talks about DuPont and the way they tried to disguise cancer-causing chemicals, and the way that they absolutely held out, even though they could see these chemicals killing local wildlife, disfiguring, killing even their employees or people in the town. And still they held out, and still they tried to lie, and still there was subterfuge. And we further complicated these sort of matters, of course, by saying that conspiracy theories are something to be belittled and laughed at, when it's human nature to conspire in some instances, dark human nature, but it's human nature to want to protect something and thus to lie in order to protect a thing, even at the expense of, in some cases, even at the expense of the welfare of others. And so the way forward is to educate ourselves as much as we can spiritually, and to grow as much as we can spiritually. Because when you start to grow spiritually, there's many gifts there. Some spiritual gifts. You can develop psychically, you can develop in all sorts of ways, and with that development comes greater responsibility. But I believe that that is the way we're supposed to be developing on this planet. Not technologically at the expense of our own souls. No, we're not robots, we're not machines. And for the people thinking that to become a machine is the way that we evolve, they're missing the point. That isn't an evolutionary step for us. That's a devolutionary step. We have come here, we have been lucky enough to experience all kinds of emotion. We can experience love. That's the most beautiful, life-affirming emotion that we could possibly ever experience. And we're lucky that we get to experience that. And we want to hitch ourselves to emotionless, lifeless technology that makes decisions entirely logically and rationally as best it can, without any emotion whatsoever, without a soul. That's what sets us apart from machine. That's what makes us better in some cases, also worse in others, because yes, we can be a liability on the planet, but we're a liability because we're caught up in ego. We're caught up in the ego of it all, in our own vanity, in our own idealised sense of who we are. We're not caught up in the reality of the heart and the humbleness of the heart, which is at the heart of all things. Love is at the heart of all things. So in order to evolve, we must evolve spiritually. We must find this great loving consciousness and connect with it. And we must take steps towards that. Any step towards that is good. The more that you meditate, the more you get in touch with your higher self. That is to say, a self that resides above and beyond the little I of the ego. The ego is such a tiny little thing. It's a very good mechanism. It's very thorough. It does what it does to protect you, to keep your idea of your identity intact. But in order to evolve, we're going to have to transcend the ego just a little bit. Just enough that we keep a foot in both worlds, perhaps. A world of spirit and a world of this temporal, part illusory reality. Be in the world, but not of the world. To understand there's so much more. And to be able to then make decisions based upon love, not fear, not some ego, not vanity, looking at the Donald Trumps of the world. It's sickening, isn't it? All the posturing. It's just ridiculous. And yet, that's the world that we live in at the moment. It's so very primitive. From a spiritual perspective, it's laughable. This posturing, this swaggering, this ridiculous ego identification of who he thinks he is. And that's what we're dealing with. That's what we're up against. But it also shows us the folly of over-identifying with the ego. It's a lesson there for all of us as well, a bit like a sort of horrific Greek myth, you know? All of us need to do that work. All of us need to discover who we are spiritually. And then maybe we can step forward into a new reality, one in which it isn't just this onward march, this terrifying march towards transhumanism, but maybe it's something else. Maybe we choose spirit and love over the cold, dead technology, this robotic behaviour, this sense of having to become Borg or robots in order to achieve our true, well, pinnacle, the sort of the imagining of all that we could be. We could be so very much. But that's a place of love. If you give yourself completely to love the heck out of everyone, love the heck out of everything, act from a place of radical love. It doesn't mean not having boundaries anymore. You can still have good boundaries and make sure you're not exploited, but act from a place of radical love and radical trust, and talk to the divine, even if you're not quite sure you believe in it. Talk to the ether, talk to it, and start to make decisions with it, and start to co-create with it, and start to see it at work in your life. We've shut it out for so long, we've belittled it for so long, we've decided it was nothing, that it held no bearing, it was just something fabricated, it wasn't real, it's titillating, you know. You think back to Blavatsky and all that sort of thing, and the occult and ghosts, and how it's been belittled or sensationalized over the years. But we don't think about the mystics just discovering that joy and that love, that radical love. It's like fire, and it's beautiful, and it could radically transform this world. And we could then make sure that people stop hoarding. One reason people hoard so much power and greed and control is perhaps because of their own ego again. Everything, all the problems on this planet, ego. You know, I remembered seeing that again on my plant medicine retreat. It was like I zoomed out of planet Earth and just saw all of the warfare and saw so many of the problems, and I just got this distinct feeling. It was all caused by our own ego, or pretty much most of it, caused by our own ego. And if we can step beyond that and start co-creating in love, if we see everybody else as an extension of ourselves, not in a narcissistic way, but in the sense that we're all one consciousness, co-creating, then we'd look at things differently. You wouldn't want to compete against somebody. You wouldn't want to put someone else down, because you're putting down a part of yourself. You're denigrating a part of you. You'd realise that there are no winners if some people rise to the top but other people are impoverished and in suffering. You'd realise the only way out is for all of us to rise up together in love and have care for all those at the least, with the least in our society. Animals, humans, all of it. Then we want to care for the planet as well, because she's a living being too, by all accounts, Mother Earth. And we'd see the consciousness in animals too, and we would want to do them the best service we could, not just look at them as food. That's just coming from a really closed mind. You know, in order to do that, closing off your own heart to the realisation that they too are conscious, they too are capable of the same emotions as you are. We have been taught to enslave other beings just as we ourselves are enslaved, and we've been taught that that's a normal state of affairs. It doesn't have to be normal. We don't have to go along with it. We don't have to have the idea, well, that's just the way it is. No, that's just the way it's been, because we have been unthinking and not connected to our hearts so much. We need to connect more to our hearts and use our imaginations. heart-centered, to co-create something beautiful on this planet of which we can be proud to be a part of, not watching unfold with horror as many of us are doing, looking at the world stage at the moment. So these are just my thoughts for today. And if you have only one choice at the beginning of your day, if you want to boil things down to one choice, maybe just boil it down to, what would love do, you know? If you can make a choice, would it be made from fear, from shrinking back from the world, from hiding? Or is it going to be made from opening your heart in joy, in moving forward with love, expanding and not contracting? And I think we need to do an awful lot of that in the planet now. We've got to look around us and wake up to this world, because it's going to transform in the next 10 years and potentially not in a good way. And it might mean that literally some humans are going to embrace technology and others are going to shy away from it, try and find ways to become more free. And we're each of us going to have to make that choice, I think, on some level in our own lives. Would you accept a microchip? Would you accept, mRNA vaccines as mandatory? Would you accept your brain being scanned at work as just normal, as mandatory on a day-to-day level, having your boss read your brainwaves? The only way that this gets accepted as the status quo is if everybody just resigns themselves to it. You don't have to just be resigned. And I don't think any of us should be resigned. We're human, this really extraordinary thing, by whatever means, whether or not we were a happy accident. And as I say, my personal belief is that we weren't quite a happy accident. But for whatever reason, we've been given something extraordinary. We've been given love. We've been given a spirit. We're not just cold, dead matter. We're not robots. And so in what ways are we going to embrace the heart and the soul going forward? And I think that's what we need to do. We need to appreciate that the transhumanism, the great leaps in technology that we're making, are taking us down a really dark road, potentially, that lead us further and further away from the great beauty that resides within each and every one of us. So I think that'll do it for today. I hope you're well. I hope you're having a good day. Take care. God bless.